Now, it's Genesis 15:5. So, I have in here a little a picture that somebody sent from Africa. I thought it was a great picture. It's these irregular spider webs with raindrops on them, and the raindrops are like, and the spider webs are like lines connecting the dots, like the constellations. So picture this. Abraham was told, see all those dots? Go out there and connect lines between them. But all we were told is he was told to count the dots, count the stars, which of course we can't do. But he could have drawn lines between the dots which tell a story of a narration. And then he says, if you're able. Well, the other way to translate the word if is Aleph Mem, which is a mother, which is a metropolis, which is an industrial center, and it means on the condition of. Well, what's a mother do? She takes in input, she processes it, and she puts out a baby. She internalizes it, thinks about it for a while, and works on it, and delivers. We go, wait a second. Abraham must have done that. So Abraham was not the model of doing nothing. Abraham was the model of being faithful. And so what the word says, go out and separate the stars, and on the condition of what you come up with, this is my translation of what Yahweh said. He says, I will take that into consideration in order to reveal righteousness in the lives of your descendants. Because the word is zadakah, which is righteousness revealed. And the word for faithful, or faith, Abraham had faith. The word is emunah, which is the revealing of faithfulness, or his trustworthiness. Or Yahweh considered him to be a trustworthy steward of this commission, this command, this job description. So Abraham didn't just sleep all night long. He probably slept during the day when it was hot, and he probably was up all night doing his job, ciphering the stars, because as the stars go through the year, and when one of them's in its house of jurisdiction and then it's not, it's like, wait a minute, I gotta wait till tomorrow night, or maybe next year to see that again. And if every night he was up there ciphering the stars, and then his great-grandson had a dream, Joseph, he had a dream about the stars. 12 major constellations, 12 brothers, or 11 brothers. It's like, wait a minute, there's some kind of connection there. The oldest known planetarium showing, a building showing a ceiling of stars is in a place called Dendera, Egypt. A.W. Bullinger talks about it. There's another guy, I think his name was William Banks, and he wrote a book very similar to Bullinger, and Rawlinson wrote about this in like the late 1800s. The oldest known place is in Egypt about 2000 BC. Abraham lived about 2000 BC. Did Abraham study the stars and go to Egypt and say, hey guys, look what I found, you know, blah, blah, blah. Or was it Joseph that made the planetarium in Egypt? That was approximately 2000 BC, even though he was a few hundred years later, and you know, 500 years this way and that way. They don't even know when Joseph was around. According to a guy named Ted Stewart, he wrote a book called the Exodus Mystery Solved, I think is what it's called, or something like that. Ted Stewart. And he said there was a 350-year discrepancy, I think, in the Egyptologists of Britain back when they were this Egyptology craze. And he recalibrated the whole thing and found hieroglyphics, inscriptions, and also writings where somebody was saying, what just happened? Everybody's gone. The country's in ruins. Poor people are wearing wealthy people's clothes, and everything is just wiped out, suddenly wiped out. It's like the whole event of the 10 plagues probably spanned a couple months. Maybe it was a little bit longer than that, but how many days went past? You know, I tried to calculate it once just from the writings. Relatively, it was pretty quickly, the 10 plagues. Egypt was the powerhouse. It's like the United States. Imagine the United States ruling the world, and all of a sudden within 2 months gone. How'd that happen? Not even invaded. What happened? Well, the Egyptologists couldn't find record of Joseph or of Moshe, and then Ted Stewart found that they were off by 350 years. And you look back 350 years to this other place, and there's all the evidence that they were looking for. So what I'm saying is that if Joseph was the guy responsible for this planetarium in Dendera, and if the calculations are off a couple hundred years, it's like it was a long time ago, that he might have been the guy responsible. Or maybe Abraham himself was the guy responsible. Nevertheless, Josephus, mentioning that, plays right into this thing where Abraham was told to separate the stars. And the point that I'm making about this being a big deal, if the book of Hebrews says, just like Abraham had to do nothing and it was credited him for righteousness because he believed, that's not true. If Abraham was told to separate the stars, and he went out and separated the stars and determined the constellations, and came up with a story based on what he understood of Yahweh's revealing his Torah to him, then Yahweh said, tell you what, Abraham, this isn't something locked in stone that is like the predestination of what's going to happen to everybody and what's going to happen to your family, but I'm going to sit back and I'm going to watch what you do, and whatever you come up with as you calculate these stars, I'm going to take it into consideration, and I, Yahweh speaking, am going to weave it into your family in order to reveal righteousness on the earth, which actually is Yeshua, the righteous one, the Tzaddik. And he says, these stories that you come up with will play into your family. And so when Joseph sees the same type of thing, and then you have this thing with these 12 brothers, what's the meaning of their name have to do with the meaning of the constellations? I believe there's a correlation there, which is a whole other study that I did a couple years ago that we can talk about at some point. But what I'm saying is that suddenly things open up. If Abraham is the model of our faith, he's actually the model of a faithful one, a trustworthy one who did what he was told, and not the guy who didn't have to do a darn thing. So all of a sudden, this changes the game. Anyway, the question about the Sophite letters, going back to Joseph, what do they mean? Why are they there? Well, if you don't know what the letters mean, they're just random Sophite letters. But if the letters mean something, now it's a new game. What does the Kaf mean? I contend that lines up with the altar of sacrifice, lines up with the festival of Chag HaMatzot, the barbecue grill, Kaf and Lamed, which means go, it means to you, it means all. And it means when you step right inside the kingdom, having been given entry by his grace, you are given entry. The first obligation is to learn the instructions of the Torah, the constitution of the kingdom. And the application of the constitution, like the Supreme Court, the constitution would be the lines of instruction like the Kaf. The Supreme Court, like the Lamed, the shepherd's staff that says it works like this, and it doesn't work like this, and this is how you apply it, and this is how you implement the instructions. If that's the letter Kaf, why is the bottom on the Sophite letter opened up? And the Kaf, the Nun, the Pei, and the Zadi. But why is the Mem closed up? You see, the other letters, the Kaf, the Nun, the Pei, and the Zadi, in the normal style have a closed bottom. And then the Sophite letters opened up. So I sat there looking at that and go, is there a message embedded in there? It's just a matter of thinking. But the Mem is opposite. You see, the Mem in the regular form has an open bottom, and in the Sophite, it's closed. It's the inverse. So that puts the Mem aside from the other four, puts the other four in a group. Now what's going on? Now, there's one word in the scriptures that has a closed Mem in the middle. And so people say, oh, that's an anomaly. It must be speaking of the virgin birth. Why? Because the open Mem is a non-virgin. The Mem is a womb, it's feminine, and it's to say open up and give birth. Why would the Sophite be a closed Mem? Well, if the Sophite speaks of a virgin birth, what does a virgin birth mean? Well, then Yeshua speaking to Nicodemus was saying, you're not born unto eternity by the will of the flesh. It's a work of the Spirit. He was born on earth of a virgin, according to the story, which was not a will of the flesh, but was born of the Spirit. So if he was born of a closed Mem, and he's the only guy, supposedly, born of a closed Mem, and I say supposedly because there's stories with many people being born of a virgin. In fact, I was reading this one book where the guy was saying, in a certain period of time during the Roman era, so many young women claimed that they were impregnated as virgins that they made it illegal to claim so, because it was just causing too much confusion. See, we never hear that part of the story. Is it true, or they just say, I swear, I had nothing to do with that. I must have been divine impregnation. And it's like, yeah, well, whatever. My point is, Yeshua was the one that was born of a virgin. So I'm sitting here saying, yeah, but why these other ones are open-ended and the other ones closed? Just putting two and two together. What if these 5 Sophite letters are the syllabus, the course subject matter that the Messiah was going to talk about? What else? Who else ever talked about these matters? Kaf, the eternal instructions. Mem, how to be born unto eternity of the Spirit. Nun, unto eternal life. Pei, the fellowship of the Kodashim, standing in the presence of the Almighty forever. Zadi. He talked about those matters. Did he ever negate the Torah? No. But he talked about the eternal matters. What other rabbi or whatever great teacher has ever talked about the eternal matters? Read all through the Old Testament. It's not there. There's no place in the Old Testament that I've ever found even hardly mentioning eternity other than the fact the very last verse in Daniel chapter 12, he says, go your way, you'll die, you'll rise to your portion at the end of days. David said something, you will not allow your Kodesh one to see destruction, but David's rotting in the grave. Maybe he was talking about Yeshua, but other than that, there's almost nowhere in the entire Tanakh mentioning about eternity. So all of a sudden, Yeshua comes around and he talks about eternity. These 5 letters look like they speak of eternity. When I say these bottom 4, the thing that came to mind is, it looks like there's this closed floor of the other 4 letters, and on the Safit letters, it's opened up. Well, the only picture that comes to my mind when a floor opens up unto eternity is when you're on a hangman's gallows. Opened up to eternity. And it's like, well, not to put a negative spin on these, but the concept, we're playing with concepts. We're just looking at the letters and say, if Yahweh designed these, well, if Yahweh printed in drew in fingers of stone with the paleo letters, but if he told Daniel to hide the words and seal the book through the angel Gabriel 500 years ago, 500 BC, 2,500 years ago, then if Daniel came up with these flame letters, then Daniel was gifted at the command of Yahweh to do so. So that does make these of a divine wisdom. I'm not contradicting that. But the question is, what do they mean? And if you can only go back to say, well, look at these letters line up with those letters. Does this letter invalidate? No, it doesn't. So it's not like, oh, that's the old covenant and this is the new covenant. Those are the old instructions. These are the new instructions. I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is, he's saying, this Torah is unto eternity. Life is not just for life on the face of earth and then you're dead, but this life is so that you live forever. The Torah matters are of eternal consequence. From what I understand, the rabbis, the Jews, when you ask them about eternity, it's like, whatever happens is going to happen. It's not a concern. It's not a business. Whatever happens is going to happen. They're not given the specific hope for this eternal placement, which is what the whole Christian gospel is. But yet, the pay, if it lines up with Sukkot, which is, you might say, the fellowship of the Kodashim, the saints, Zadi is this sprouting, this resurrection. And if that's unto eternity, then right there in the 5 Sofit letters is to say, the fellowship of those that are in Sukkot with Yahweh have the promise of resurrection.